Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, if the UK does leave the EU without a deal, there's a warning today of severe disruption to access to pharmaceutical drugs and other medical supplies. A letter from medical leaders seen by the BBC says that a negative impact on the health and care of patients was a possibility. But the government says patients can be reassured that the supply of drugs and medical supplies won't be interrupted. Our health editor Hugh Pym reports.
A factory in Germany making insulin, vital for diabetics in the UK as well as those around Europe. Almost all of the UK's requirements are imported. The government's called for medicine stockpiles to be built up and new ferry routes to be secured because of fears of traffic chaos at Calais and Dover in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Health leaders are supportive but say more needs to be done.
Obviously, it's really welcome that the government is looking at different ways of getting supplies into the country at this really challenging time. However, it's not tried and tested. There is huge risk around how these items are actually going to make it to the front line where they're needed. We don't know that that system is going to work because we haven't tried that system yet.
A letter seen by BBC News from medical leaders, coordinated by the Royal College of Physicians, is being sent to the Prime Minister. It says, "We are simply unable to reassure patients that their health and care won't be negatively impacted by the UK's exit from the EU," and goes on to state that delays at the border could exacerbate current supply issues and create the very real possibility that life-saving medication is delayed from making it across the Channel. The government's position was set out earlier today by the minister in charge of no-deal planning.
We're confident that the NHS and pharmacists will have access to everything that they need. What we are going to do is to make sure that businesses have access, as we see here at the moment, to the facilities that they need to be able to export, and also that consumers have and will continue to have a flow of goods into this country.
Pharmacists say for a little while now they've had difficulties obtaining some medicines. They're doing the best they can, they say, to help patients. There's no clear evidence that's linked to Brexit. But they argue if Britain does leave the EU without a deal, that'll add to the existing pressure on the supply chain. This Danish company makes nearly half of the UK's insulin. They told us 3 times the government's required 6-week stockpile had been built up.
We've done this obviously so that we can reassure patients who rely on our medicines every day. The 500,000 people in the UK, we can reassure them that they don't need to be concerned. They will be able to get their medicines no matter what the outcome of Brexit in the coming months.
Other pharmaceutical companies say they have months' worth of supplies stored in the UK. But health leaders are still not convinced enough is being done to ensure patients will still get high standards of care. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
The possibility of a no-deal Brexit is also focusing minds at one major UK supermarket, which has told the BBC it's considering rationing the amount that smaller businesses can buy if there's a disruption to supply. Our business editor Simon Jack is here with me. So Simon, different sectors are preparing for no deal, clearly. What's the thinking here?
Supermarkets have got very sophisticated supply chains and they spend a lot of time and money preparing for all sorts of Brexit outcomes. But what some of them are worried about is that smaller businesses have not done that amount of work and may suffer if there is supply disruptions. What one of them wants to avoid is for these smaller businesses, I'm talking about convenience stores, local restaurants, turning to their supermarkets as a kind of wholesaler of last resort. And they say in that situation they would consider introducing limiting, rationing the amount that individual buyers could purchase of certain goods to enable ordinary shoppers to get what they need. And these limits would not, I'm told, be set at limits that ordinary shoppers would notice, but for commercial buyers it would limit their ability to do that. So the government, of course, says that the no-deal Brexit disruption can be avoided. Some of the situations we've seen leaked over the press were a worst-case scenario, and is a situation they're working very hard to avoid. I think the message here is that those businesses that are thinking of using supermarkets as a last resort wholesaler may need to rethink.
Simon, thank you.
Well, now, as the Prime Minister began his European tour to try to get a deal, his man in charge of planning for a no deal was out insisting everything is in hand. Visiting Holyhead Port, Michael Gove said the government is taking steps to ensure the UK is properly prepared for a no-deal Brexit, which includes giving port towns an extra £9 million to get ready. That is nowhere near enough, say many councils, as Jane Death has been finding out.
Oh yes, so that one there.
While Boris Johnson's been in Germany apparently striving for a Brexit deal,
Yes, the Ulysses is just there. Yes.
he had ministers at the ports to say everything would be fine without one. In Holyhead in North Wales, Michael Gove dismissed fears of logjams at ports, raised in leaked government documents at the weekend. But he couldn't guarantee no delays in a no-deal world.
Broadly, the flow of goods and produce that we see here should be maintained after October the 31st. It's my job to make sure that every company that knows that October the 31st is coming also knows what it needs to do in order to continue to access the market that's so important to it.
The local government secretary, Robert Jenrick, made a flying visit to East Midlands Airport to announce some areas in England will get £9 million to pay for preparations. It's not new money, it's part of a £2.1 billion no-deal fund the Chancellor announced last month. But today, councils have been told £5 million will go to those close to ports and airports. Kent will get half of that because it has ports like Dover and the Channel Tunnel. North East Lincolnshire will get £300,000 to help prepare the areas around the ports of Immingham and Grimsby. 14 other areas, including Hull, Manchester, Crawley and Portsmouth, will get £150,000 each. And 38 resilience forums, partnerships of local public services, will get £4 million between them to get Brexit ready. It means North West Leicestershire, home to East Midlands Airport, gets another £150,000 to plan for Brexit problems.
It's a drop in the ocean compared to the cost of a potential no deal for a council.
In addition to that funding, of course, the Chancellor has announced a broader package, £2.1 billion for Brexit preparedness. The Department for Transport is allocating some of that funding to key economic infrastructure such as...
What would you spend £150,000 on?
They are using that funding to designate staff to this task, to think of the particular challenges that no-deal Brexit will pose to their locality.
Portsmouth's worried possible delays at customs would see lorries blocking the motorway. The Lib Dem council leader says he's already spent £1 million building places for trucks to sit.
We've had to spend money to put triage points in on junctions 1 and 2 of the M275, to build a lorry park, to be able to send lorries who haven't got the right documentation so they can get it, and to work with Hampshire to have another lorry park up in the middle of Hampshire to be able to be there as an overflow. So money has to be spent because we can't let Portsmouth just grind to a halt.
The government says it's helping councils get ready for Britain leaving the EU. If that's minus a deal, the view from here will tell us just how prepared we are.
Well, I'm joined now by Labour's Tudor Evans, the leader of Plymouth City Council, of course, a city with a port. Well, there's £9 million being spread about the ports, and you get 105,000 of it. I suppose they say you only have a little bit of cargo.
Well, we're looking at about 50% increase in port traffic as a result of this creation of what is effectively a hard border in Plymouth. But we haven't had anything like the money we need for the soft stuff, like training of staff, recruiting and hiring of staff, to do things that they haven't had to do since we've been in the single market. So we're a bit behind where we need to be, and we're certainly way behind in terms of the money that we should have from the government to do the government's bidding. I mean, bear in mind that last week the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government designated us as the Boris bailout team. In other words, we're the ones that will have to put Brexit into operation because that's the traditional role of local government, to do the government's bidding.
Well, if they keep the grant they've given you to 105,000, what's the consequence going to be?
Well, if I would just say it will be stockpiling at ports because they won't be able to get stuff in or out. It's a real issue, this. We're not crying wolf. And of course, local governments have been denuded with our financial headroom for the best part of 10 years. I mean, we've been hollowed out as far as a lot of the stuff we need to do is concerned. I mean, I'm £100 million a year down on what I was a decade ago. And so with that kind of level of cut, to get the offer of 105,000, in other words, 1,000th of what we've lost, and to make no deal happen, I think is a bit of a stretch. You know, Mr. Johnson has decided to take the controls of the aircraft, and he's flying us into the side of a mountain. And he's all of a sudden decided to cry, brace yourselves, brace yourselves. Well, that's not really going to do it. What we absolutely need at the moment is some more fuel.
Well, the truth is that actually the cargo you do deal with is rather complex in the sense that you have ferries, and ferries bring in individuals who, for the first time in years, are going to have to be stripped virtually to find out how much wine they're bringing in, the rest of it, and that is actually a people-to-people business.
That's absolutely the point. And there's a lot of products and services that come through those ports that need inspecting, and we simply don't have the staff trained, let alone lorry drivers doing the paperwork. The officials haven't learned how to do the paperwork yet because it's hard to recruit when you haven't got any money. So we're in a bit of a way here, to be honest with you, and for the Prime Minister and certainly Mr Gove to be asserting that we're ready for action is simply a complete misstatement of the truth.
But Mr Evans, when you say you're in a bit of a way, isn't the truth you're facing absolute chaos?
Yes, I think that is not exaggerating the situation. We, along with a lot of other places, are simply not ready yet. We're a port that's going to be bringing in medicines, medical supplies, and we've already heard about shortages coming through. Now, we haven't been designated as a strategic port, but the government have given hundreds of thousands of pounds to Ramsgate, which has no ferry facilities, no port facilities that could take these medicines in, but they get the cash. And we don't. It's chaotic up there in Westminster at the moment, in spite of what the smiling faces of this Tory government are saying. They're not ready. They've upped the ante. And to be honest with you, they haven't made sure that everybody is ready to follow them.
Tudor Evans, thank you very much indeed for joining us from Plymouth.